In this video, we'll look at how to render captured data in our app. In our last video, we created a simple form for our app which let us capture some data about a spaceship. That data gets captured in our Buzzy workspace, which contains your app's admin and backend. Since the last video, I've added a bunch of data here to give us something to work with. Each spaceship constitutes one row in our data table. At the moment, we've got nowhere to display this data in our app, so let's go about fixing that. Here's our Figma design file containing our app screens. I've made some changes already. This is our home screen. I've updated this design to include a simple menu of spaceships. Let's get this menu to render the spaceship data we've captured via the form we created in the last video. Taking a closer look at our menu, we can see that it has a frame that wraps around the list items. Each list item here represents a dummy view of the data we want to render in our menu. In this case, we want the spaceship name and a thumbnail of its image. The idea is that each list item here will link to a new screen showing the details of this spaceship. I've got that ready to go over here, but we'll get to this later. At the bottom of the menu, we have some simple pagination controls, including a Load More button. The same way we wrapped our form in a Buzzy form element to link it with the correct data table in the previous video, we need to wrap our menu in a Buzzy View element. As per the previous video, our Buzzy View component needs a unique name. This gets pointed at our spaceship's data table. There's two modes to a view, results and no results. We want this to show our results. We'll come back to the no results option shortly. We can now tell Buzzy how many result rows, i.e. spaceships, in our data table we want the view to display at a time. We'll set it to 5 for now. We'll set them to render in a newest first order. Okay, on to the list items. Each represents a single row from our data table. But while they're static Figma layers here, we want these to dynamically render in our live app. So really, we only need one of these to act as our result row template, and it will repeat dynamically to show each spaceship in our spaceship's data table. That can be this first one, so we define this as our repeating item inside our view container. The remainder of the list items in our Figma design are simply here as visual placeholders for our design. We don't want these to display in our live app, so we'll set them to be ignored. Jumping back to our first template or repeating item, we can drill into our Figma layers and link them to the right data columns or fields in our data table. There's only two here. This one is the spaceship name. We render this in summary mode to just get the text. And this is the image. Again, summary mode is useful here. Before we test this, let's look at our pagination controls. In our view element, which we've pointed at the spaceship's data table, we have access to some special Buzzy elements that provide information about that table. In this case, we can define these numbers. This is the first row number of our results within our current view pagination. And this is the last row number of results within our current view. And this is the total number of result rows there are in our data table altogether. Since we restricted our view to showing 5 results at a time, it will load rows 1 to 5 first, then stop. To load more, we let our user hit this Load More button. It gets assigned an action of Load More. I'll do some quick housekeeping and update my layer names so it's clear what's going on here. All right, let's test this. I'll hit Update App, and here's our live app. On this side, we have our workspace showing the spaceship's data table. And here's our list of spaceships. Note it's only displaying the first 5 results. When I hit Load More, it loads the next set of results. I only have 8 in total. And the pagination controls update. The Load More button isn't required now as we're seeing all 8 results, so it doesn't display anymore. Our dynamic menu is working so far, but we want the user to be able to click on one of these items and see a details screen for that spaceship. Jumping back to Figma, I've already designed a Spaceship detail screen and marked it up as a Buzzy basic screen. Back in our menu, we can assign a navigate action to the repeating menu item. Make sure the repeating item toggle remains selected when you do this. I've already updated my layer name for consistency. When we assign a navigate action, notice we can pass data to the target screen. In this case, we have data context, since we're in a view that is pointed at a particular data table, and more specifically, we're in a repeating element that is pointed at a particular row. When we select current data to pass to our next screen, this context is what gets passed. Looking at our Spaceship screen, we know that when a user navigates to this from the menu item, the entire screen gets the data context of the Spaceship's data table and the particular row corresponding to the menu item the user clicked. So now if I go through and mark up my field data values relative to the Spaceship's data table, as before we have the name, an image, and now a description. Updating our app and testing again, we can see that the dynamic menu now links to a dynamically populated detail screen. Each time I select a new spaceship from the list, I navigate to its corresponding detail screen. We've just published a live web app with real dynamic data directly from Figma. So far, so good. But wait, I hear you ask, what if there are no spaceships in the data table at all? Glad you asked. Remember how when we defined our Buzzy view, we had a choice between results and no results? Here's the design I'd like to display if there are no spaceships. It's a simple message telling the user none were found. I use the plugin to define this as a view, point it at the same Spaceship's data table as our working menu, and make sure it has the same Buzzy component name as our results view. I can move this no results view into my screen design next to my results view, or leave it elsewhere on my Figma canvas. Buzzy will only display the single correct version at any one time. While I've named my layers with the results and no results convention so I can keep track of what's going on, the Buzzy component names in the plugin for both are identical here, Spaceship list. This way, Buzzy knows that they're two versions of the same item. If there's a result returned from our Spaceship's data table, Buzzy will only render the results view. If there's no rows returned, it will render only the no results view. To test this, I can update my app again. And jumping into my workspace, I can delete all my Spaceship data rows. Now, when we view the menu, it's displaying our no results message instead of our paginated list. Phew, this video covered a lot of ground. To recap, use a Buzzy view to wrap a part of your UI where you want to list multiple result rows from a particular data table, in our case, the Spaceship list on the home page. Within that view, a repeating item acts as a template for how you render your data. For instance, our Spaceship list items, each with a thumbnail and a name. Navigating from a repeating item within a view to a new Buzzy app screen lets you pass the data context of that particular data table row to the new app screen. On that new app screen, marking up your data connections by pointing the UI elements at a particular field within the relevant data table will display that field's value for the row connected to the menu or list item you just navigated from. A no results view with the same name as a results view can be used to tag a UI element that will display if that data table contains no data. In our next video, we'll look at editing and deleting data dynamically.